I'm here in the audio garden with Freda Epum, and I'm so happy to welcome you, author of the memoir, The Gloomy Girl Variety Show.
Thank you so much for having me, Martin.
It's a pleasure, and it was very interesting read.
Mhm.
Maybe we could talk a little. I think the title kind of leads us into a lot. Just the reference to a variety show, and you do talk a lot about different TV shows that populated your childhood and growing up in America. You're the daughter of Nigerian immigrants
Yeah.
to America, and you grew up first in Arizona. Um, why a gloomy girl variety show?
For me, I chose the title Gloomy Girl because I think a lot of my life story has revolved around mental health and healing from childhood trauma and processing the world around me. And if you have heard of the whole like hot girl thing or sad girl thing, there is kind of a trend within social media to refer to someone as like a girl or to categorize the type of life that you're living at the time so that it's easier for other people to relate to, easier for other people to identify themselves with. And for me, being gloomy was something that I identified with seeing other Black women who portrayed themselves as awkward or misfits, things of that nature. And the book also started to take hold with some of my visual art, which the grounding piece for that was a piece where I was wearing a giant rain cloud over my head. It was a performance piece that I did in Northampton, Massachusetts. And that was called The Diary of the Wet Cloud. So at that point in my life that I was writing this book for the 10-year period, it was largely a healing journey that I was really trying to focus on. And so I wanted both it to have an easy way for other people to identify themselves with it. So now my press has printed some gloomy girl buttons so people can walk around branded as a gloomy girl, which I think is a really wonderful way to like bring this community together of people that are just trying to process their own selves and their own way they're fitting into the world through art.
That's very interesting, and I think it lends to uh, the idea. I mean, you were talking about processing, and the book to me, in a way, is sort of a it's you processing. It's like a
Mm-hmm.
document of you processing, and it is what's called a hybrid memoir. I
Yeah.
think hybrid in terms of just it being, it seems like part journal, part documentation of an experience, but it also includes, as you mentioned, your art, your photography, and it's based on, you mentioned performance art. And so it's really a multimedia hybrid
Yeah.
memoir. And you began as a visual artist, I think. Could you maybe just
Mm-hmm.
talk about how you got to creating this hybrid memoir?
Yeah, I began as a visual artist. I've always been a creative person since I was a little kid. My parents would take me. My mom has a story of where she took me to where they were going to go buy a car at one point, and I was just drawing cars and just spending a lot of the time entertaining myself with art and with drawing. And that was something that I followed throughout high school and throughout college and exploring different art mediums, doing internships at galleries and museums, and really wanting to live an artist life. And I think I started to transition to writing after my undergrad, which my degree was in studio art. And I slowly was making my way from more representational art to like installation to performance, things that I wanted to leap off the page. And it felt like inside me I had more to say than I felt like I could say in a visual medium at the time. I was also saw a lot of a clear path to how to become an artist through the writing community that I was able to embed myself in Tucson, and to be able to go to workshops and residencies and MFA. And it seems like a more clear path to me toward becoming an artist. And how I ended towards this hybrid work was really just I wanted a way of honoring my past self. And my sister actually was the one that showed me like an older portfolio of some artwork that I had done from like years back. And I was also working with a developmental editor at the time on this project. And there was only just one picture in the essay collection. And my developmental editor, Sanel, she was saying like, "Oh, I'd really love to see more of that. I really encourage you to play with the manuscript." And at that point, I'd been working on it for so long, 8 years, and was really just kind of like at my wit's end with myself and my own words on the page. And so that invitation to play, where I was able to like infuse my artwork because it wasn't necessarily a part of my plan to have more artwork in it. The book just evolved year after year, taking shape into final form. And I was really happy with the way that everything ended up because I felt like it was a way to honor my past self as an artist. It was a way to share an artist's life. I think of it as an artist memoir, and some other books that I really love in that tradition are Renee Gladman's Calamities and Gabrielle Seville's Swallow the Fish. That was a huge inspiration for me. Um, and so I also wanted to be inspired by the works that I was reading. And so almost self unconsciously kind of reproducing that artist memoir form.
Mm. And you reference a lot of artists and writers in this memoir. And one of the along with your images of, this woman with this cloud over her head, and we have
Right.
see different varieties of that. But I think one of the most striking images for me was actually a photograph taken of tourists in front of that love
Mm,
statue,
yeah,
well, sculpture, I should say, not statue. And
yeah,
while there was performance art going behind them that they were completely ignoring, and I think that speaks a
yeah.
lot to the experience that you talk about in this book. Could you maybe elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, the piece, it's by Keith A. Wallace. It's in Philadelphia. So he's laying down, posing as Michael Brown, I think was shot that same year in 2014. There's a series of like die-in protests where people will lie down and play dead here, quote unquote, as a way to I guess, demand the attention of the gravity of this. And that is completely the opposite of what the performance portrays, or what are the other people that are standing in front of the person and taking a picture as tourists, just kind of a life moves on sort of thing. Um, and in that same essay, there's another article that references that performance that's happening. And there's a older white couple that talks about, they say that they're black kids, honey. They don't have anything better to do. Um, and so that essay in it is about talking about uh, Afro-pessimism and the sense that a black life is a futile life in America, and the way in which there are signs assigned to Black people of that we have nothing better to do than die. And that was just a more theoretical exploration of that, but also something that I think you can take away the theory and still have it have a strong application in like the actual reality. And so that was just me wrestling with that on the page as well.
And you wrestle with these themes throughout the memoir in the context of searching for a home. You have home number one, number two, number three, which goes back to, the various TV shows that populate the memoir House Hunters and so on. Um, y- you're the daughter of immigrants, not descended from slaves, and yet
No.
your experience in America as a black woman is inescapable. In that sense, it makes no difference to sort of the American experience as a black woman, searching
Hmm.
for home and a feeling of safety.
Hmm.
Maybe we could say, I think that's a big part of what you explore, just
Yeah.
not even feeling
Yeah.
safe, home in bed when we think of
Yeah.
like Breonna Taylor and
Hmm.
these various experiences. I'm not sure where I was going as far as a
You're
question
fine.
about that, but this was what really made an impression on me as I was reading, and your struggle with mental illness in that context. Maybe you could just explore that. I didn't really ask you a question there, but
Mhm.
it's an important theme in the book.
Yeah, I think race and mental health and the idea of a Black immigrant is something that is really runs deep throughout the book. I I think through this often in terms of my relationships with some of my Black American friends. Um, the generational effects of slavery have not been that specific intergenerational trauma that my ancestors have experienced. But I think I relate a lot to a lot of Black Americans who have several generations in America of just the same double consciousness that W.B. Du Bois talks about this. He says, a Negro, two souls, two unreconciled strivings, the sense of looking at yourself through the eyes of another person, the experience of being an other. And I think that that's something that I really wanted to portray very deeply in this book. And that other people have written to me and saying, I'm not a Nigerian American, but I related to this piece of where you're talking about this not belonging. And I think that is the way that I wanted to explore my relationship to my Blackness at the time, is this sense of not belonging, the sense of racial isolation that um, some Black folks that might go to predominantly white institutions or have been raised in the suburbs or things like that.
As you
Um,
were.
yeah, yeah, as I was. Um, and also like a story of trying to find a sense of agency amidst all of that. And I think that is the way that I wanted the book to end with uh, a sense that this narrator has won a little bit, that they are more content within themselves and that they have used their life as an artist and this wrestling on the page to get there. As the piece ends with, in the braiding, I've made myself a place. And that's how I wanted to explore all
Well, I think in terms of the American dream, say, in many ways you've accomplished that. You're a postgraduate. You have degrees from higher institutions
that.
and
Hmm.
been recognized as an artist and writer. And yet there's this persisting feeling of being other and even of anger, right? There's a something that repeats in the book. You have a line about I forget the exact line now. I'm sorry.
I think it's the violence happens to me when.
Yes, and it's crossed out every time. This is a repetition, and it kind of goes hand in hand with you talking about Audre Lorde and the way she talks about anger, and in particular, a student's response to you that she just wants people to feel sorry for her, which seems like a very kind of flippant response,
Yeah.
but very common in
Mhm.
America to, oh, they're going on about that again, and that
Yeah.
in turn, I think, kind of gets this response of anger ignited again. maybe you could talk a little bit about anger and how to deal with anger
Yeah,
or how to express it.
I think I'm still wrestling with that myself, even post writing the book. I think anger, and when you're living in the US as someone who's more socially aware and experiencing like systemic oppression, is just something that you're always going to live with. And I think that's something that I am still contending with. And the ways that I've tried to contend with in this book was almost like a revenge plot. If you have seen some of the Black horror movies that are popular now that have a lot of social criticism embedded in them, there is often a sense of like, I want to reclaim this violence that has happened to me. And so that is how that series of essays, series of poems, the violence is crossed out, where the first stanza or subsection might involve a microaggression or some smaller act of violence. And then after that cross out is when there is the reclaiming of the person's time and the reclaiming of the narrative of the story. And that is what I really wanted to think through with anger is how to make anger productive. There's the Audre Lorde essay where she talks about the uses of anger. And so I try to make it more instructional for the narrator, for the reader.
And in context of what's going on today, these last few months of our shared American history, um, I was struck by your reference to the socialist. Again, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the name of
Mm.
the group, but the socialist. Can you remind me? A socialist
I guess
patients collective
yes.
refers to capitalism as being the cause of most sicknesses and mental disturbance as well. And I feel like we're just in this moment in time where we're looking at our friends, our immigrant friends especially, who are really in an unsafe place. And
Hmm.
things seem to be falling apart in many ways. And I'm thinking to myself, is this in some way an opportunity as things fall apart to restructure ourselves in a different kind of way? Because do we really want to go back to the way we've been? There's much to criticize.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to get your perspective on that in terms of capitalism as well as mental health.
Hmm. Yeah, I have been thinking through a lot about what is happening post this new administration. And I don't know, I wrestle with it myself, I think. I'm particularly within like the mental health sphere, like very much aware of the weaponizing of trauma. And I think that is something that I've seen like consistently in terms of so many bills and executive orders happening so simultaneously. There's just such a darker cloud, I think, amongst some of the folks that I know that are doing organizing, that are artists, that are working in the nonprofit sector, and that you're just really just trying to move along with your daily life. That's what the flow of capitalism looks like. But then inside, you're still trying to reckon with the move towards a oligarchy to totalitarian government. And I don't know, I think it's difficult to reconcile. I think I have seen some other artists that are looking towards like the 1930s and the 1940s. I think it was Hey, St. Lehman, I was just saying that on Instagram about reading some of the work that was coming out of that period and how other artists have dealt with very similar circumstances. And that's something that I'm looking to myself is just looking back in time to see what is the right path, if there is one for each of us as individuals, like where do we plug into there's the social change wheel where there are the weavers that are weaving the stories together. There's the nurturers that are tending to their sicker parents. There's the folks that are outside protesting. And that's often how I try to describe to people how to get engaged when they feel immobilized. Is just think about other ways for you to use what is your own natural gifts for the benefit of another person. I think that is like the deepest way to show love during all of this. And I'm just trying to tap into more community, um, and particularly of other folks that are writers, Black writers going through mental health struggles and thinking through how we can find spaces of care together.
Can we talk a little more about your process as a writer? This is a show for readers
Yeah,
and writers, and I'm
absolutely.
curious how you approached both well, you spoke a little bit about it, but how you maybe came to the decision to write a memoir, and then what that path was to getting it published for you.
Yeah. Happy to share. For me, my decision to write a memoir, I feel like it chose me a little bit in the corny way that that is. I think I had this experience where I had been to the psych ward multiple times, feeling kind of isolated, feeling like I had never seen a story like this quite articulated. I don't really know that many other books that are as similar to mine. And as I was writing this, more and more were starting to come out. There was I'm Telling the Truth, But I'm Lying was starting to come out. A lot of work by Aisha Sabatini Sloan, Super Sad Black Girls, another poetry collection that I really like. And so I got more energized the longer I was working on it to see this type of work thriving out in the real world. And I decided that I wanted to try my hand at writing a book. I didn't really know anything about writing a book or the publishing industry or anything like that. I decided to get an MFA, and that was kind of the fertile ground that gave me 2 years of funding to work on my book, and then also the mentorship from my professors and a community of other writers to read my work. So that was how I first started in writing, was getting an MFA. I also did a lot of workshops and residencies. I did Lambda Literary and Tin House and VONA. And at VONA is where I met a friend who introduced me to my agent, Rico. And that was where after I was working with Reiko, we did a lot of work to edit the book for submission. After my MFA, I was also querying other agents before I had signed with Reiko. So going through that process as well, I think I queried about like 100 people.
Mm.
Um, and so I was experiencing like a lot of rejection at that time, a lot of not sure how to sell this. If you were to turn this into a novel, that would be awesome. There's a lot of not kind of taking the book as it was. Um, and so I worked with Reiko, I worked with a developmental editor, and then we went out on submission and we sold it to Feminist Press after about 2 rounds of submission. And I think the advice that I would give to folks if they want to write a memoir is that there's several paths in the literary industry. You don't necessarily have to have an MFA. And even if you have an MFA, you could have a low residency MFA where you live where you are. and you might go to a campus for a couple weeks during the summer. You could work with a coach. You could just exchange writing with friends over the years and form a small group. I think that writing for me was more of a accessible art form, and that there is like a long history of people offering information about how to be a writer, how to get your book published. And I think that's like a really wonderful benefit of being a writer is that there's already such a legacy of a writing community.
Thank you for that. And is there anything else that, I haven't brought up that you might like to say to our listeners about your book, what you would like them to know or think about?
Yeah. I think I would like the listeners to think about how to write something for themselves that might be similar to this. As this, I love listening to podcasts that are for writers by writers. And so I think when I read a book, I try to read it with my writer brain on. Like, how could I recreate this? And how could I um, broaden my creativity? I think that's what I hope for this book with the hybrid nature of it is that it makes more room for other books similar.
Well, I think it certainly inspired me to think about my own writing or maybe even just the possibility of publishing my own writing, even though it doesn't quite mesh with what I consider to be, the predominant genres out there. So
Yeah.
that's a point very well taken, and I appreciate that.